What's up, Scyushi Squad? We are back in more Trove, and hot off of the heels of the 36K video talking about the Tomb Raiser versus U10 and Delves and so on and so forth. This is going to end up being how you build the Tomb Raiser. Now, there's a couple of changes that have happened with the Tomb Raiser on the Shadow Hunter update, which currently isn't on consoles at the time that I'm recording this anyways. Hopefully you guys get it soon. Fingers crossed, soon TM, right? But there's not really that many changes. Basically, the Tomb Raiser is actually slightly weaker on PC versus the version that you guys have on console. But when the Shadowy Spotlight update, yeah, that's what it's called, the Shadow Hunter update comes out for console, it essentially ends up upgrading all of the classes. Like, they all end up having slight tweaks to them. And Tomb Raiser, oddly enough, ends up getting a nerf and then a buff that I don't think is intentional, which we'll talk about in a minute. I talked about it in the Delves video more particularly, but let's just mention the stat changes with the Shadowy Spotlight update. So Tomb Raiser has his Skeletals, which is your little minions. Their basic attack has been decreased to 200%, down from 225, so 25% change, which is quite significant. And then your ultimate ability has had its damage brought down to 1,375, down from 1,500. So quite a bit of substantial damage, which kind of rounds out the class. But generally speaking, I find it very, very strange that we had these nerfs to the Tomb Raiser, because with this update, a lot of the classes ended up getting a buff, including some classes that didn't need it. Like, Draco got a buff with this update, even though I would say Draco and Tomb Raiser were kind of hand in hand. Like, they were very even in terms of two classes competing with one another. It's like you couldn't go wrong with either of the classes. But as of right now, because of this slight nerf that they did to the Tomb Raiser, I'd say Draco is probably a little bit higher in the spectrum in terms of damage. Now, how are you going to end up playing the character? Well, generally speaking, you're not going to turn any heads with speed farming. You know, Tomb Raiser is not going to end up being a very good speed farmer, just because your movement speed is not going to be ideal. Generally speaking, though, you can have movement speed on all of your gear because you don't need attack speed, because attack speed doesn't scale anything on Tomb Raiser. And you can end up having, I've got anyways 112 movement speed at base, which is still better than default mount movement speed. So it's not like it's bad or anything. But when compared to, you know, some of the other speedier classes like Dino Tamer, Shadow Hunter, Neon Ninja and stuff, those characters can just right to the next dungeon and destroy everything, versus Tomb Raiser, which kind of just walks to the next dungeon but can still destroy everything. Like, your time to kill is actually really, really quick on Tomb Raiser. But generally speaking, what you're going to be maining the Tomb Raiser for is probably the Delves, maybe Leviathans. If you don't really have any other option, or if you just really like the Tomb Raiser, you can main it for Leviathans, especially because of the current bug that's in the game. I say that in quotations because I'm not sure if this is intentional, because it was never mentioned in any of the patch notes. But basically, if you're brand new to Tomb Raiser, you can summon 6 little skeleton babies. So long as they're attacking things, you'll generate more, minions to end up spawning. But you summon 6 of them in total. You can see one of those is my ultimate. And then from then on, any additional babies you summon are going to end up having a purple health bar, which basically empowers them and makes them a little bit stronger, dealing a little bit more damage, right? Ignore the damage numbers because this training dummy is broken. But eventually you end up getting all 6 of your minions to end up having the purple health bar, and then you end up using your ultimate ability. And is this intentional? I don't know. But what's supposed to happen is when you use your ultimate, it's essentially supposed to steal the power from all of your minions with their purple health bar. You actually saw that guy for a split second. You see some of them are getting blue health bar, and then they just go instantly back up to purple. Like, it's very, very strange. I think, I could be wrong about this, it feels to me like the purple health bar on your skeletal babies is on a timer now, rather than something that is essentially supposed to be an infinite power-up. Because you can see our ultimate, actually, he lost his purple health bar as well. So I think he survived long enough that the purple health bar eventually went away. So it might be that this is fully intentional. And what does this mean for the Tomb Raiser? Well, essentially what it means is, it means that in order to deal the most optimal damage possible as Tomb Raiser, it's slightly faster. because what would normally happen, your most optimal damage is having your ult with purple health bar and all of your babies with purple health bar. But since your ult normally stole the purple health bar from your babies, it meant that you had to continuously summon additional little baby skeletons until they all ended up having purple health bar as well as your ult. So now we've kind of cut out the middleman, and it makes it slightly faster in terms of just dishing out damage as quickly as possible. But in the long run, the Tomb Raiser still has these nerfs, and generally speaking, is going to do a lot less damage. Well, not a lot less damage. It's not like you can't use the class or anything, but it's less damage than it used to be. Those of you on console that are maining the class, but it's not really significant enough to end up evoking any sense of rebellion or change this. I mean, I still think that it's really weird, but yeah. Anyways, ignore the damage numbers on the dummies. They're broken. Essentially, they just don't have like the proper defense scaling. It's very weird. Anyways, let's get into how you're actually going to end up building it, talking about the gear and stuff like that. Sorry about the long-winded explanation at the beginning, but I felt it was important to end up mentioning. So obviously, you know, I'm completely super duper optimal as this guy. You're not looking for an exact copy of my character, but around this area is going to end up having you nice and good. So, you know, for your gear, you want to have crit damage, movement speed as your main stats on almost all of them. You can, it's up to you. You can have energy regen on the staff if you want, just because with the way that your skeletal babies end up spawning and stuff like that, you're pretty much always going to be at 0 energy. Unfortunately, just the way that energy recharge works, it's just, as far as I know, energy recharge doesn't increase how quickly you start recharging energy. It's once you start recharging energy, then it goes quicker. Someone correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but generally speaking, you can have energy regen on the staff if you can sacrifice the damage, but otherwise, again, you can just have all the movement speed. Ignore the fact that I have stability on this staff. That's just because I swap my stats around all the time. Anyways, for the ally, you're probably going to be going for Puck because you want to have that cooldown reduction for your ultimate ability. Otherwise, you can end up using a couple different options. So Aviator is going to end up being a good one if you're trying to use the Tomb Raiser specifically for speed farming, because you don't really want to use your ult that much if you're in U10 or whatever. A couple other quick allies that you can end up using if you don't have the Delve allies is Prefect Penguin is going to end up being a good movement speed magic ally. And then there's also going to end up being, of course, the staple hold Chronomancer Cubesley, which is essentially, these are the same as the two allies from the Delves that I just mentioned. It's just that these don't have the light value on them, right? But I mean, you can get these allies for like super duper cheap as far as I know. Oh, good lord. Okay, that's more expensive than I thought. And then anyways, that's for the ally. For the ring, obviously you want to have the highest crystal ring possible, but you know, beggars can't be choosers if you're using the hidden ring effect. Tomb Raiser's actually got some pretty good ones, but generally speaking, it's going to actually be the Skelbiggle, as far as I know, is the best one. Reduce energy from Banshee's Boon basically will give you more invulnerability, because when you use your Banshee's Boon, you essentially end up becoming a god and taking like 90% damage reduction or something ridiculous. It's what makes the Tomb Raiser so tanky. But generally speaking, you're going for the Skelbiggle, so using Bone Tirage has a chance to summon a larger Skeletal, and when this large Skeletal dies, or the Skelbiggle dies, I should say, it will spawn into Skeletal. So it essentially is going to end up being a stronger minion. Is a random chance, but it's a stronger minion that can spawn, and if it dies, it'll end up essentially giving the purple health bar to all of your other minions if they're out in the field. So generally speaking, it's just more damage, right? And that's always going to end up being the most optimal for anything in Trove related. For your banner, you know, I got perma torches up the butt. I got super duper lucky and got a bunch of them, but otherwise you can end up using any of the Delves ones. The temporary torches are going to end up giving you insane amounts of light if you don't want to end up using the Delve ones. But I like using the Delve ones just because they're quick and easy, and I can just, you know, like increases chance of standard Delve enemies dropping inert geode and so on and so forth. But, you know, if you're out in the world fighting Leviathans and stuff like that, then, you know, just use the Leviathan torches. They're going to be your best bet. Food I never touch, but anyways, you're just going to end up wanting to use any of the foods that end up giving you more light value, because light is basically an armor penetration stat in the game, and the enemies in the game end up having the armor stat. Moving on to the potions, I always just use death defying. You know me, I'm a simple guy, so it's simple and clean. That's all there is to it. However, since Tomb Raiser has such insane survivability because of your Banshee's Boon, you can essentially end up using whatever Flask you want, man. I mean, generally, Conjurers is going to be really good. Vial of Unleashed Power works great on Tomb Raiser because you're spamming your ult essentially anyways. And so what this does is makes it so that when you use your ult, you'll end up healing a little bit. And fun fact, way back in the day, during the Shadow Tower eras of Trove, Vial of Unleashed Power with the Tomb Raiser made the class invincible because you could essentially end up spamming your Banshee's Boon to keep you invulnerable on top of just healing out of any damage with your ult, right? Like, it was just, good times, man. But yeah, I mean, generally speaking, for your vials, Death Defying is just the safest bet. But you can use whatever just because the survivability is there for the Tomb Raiser, so you can kind of experiment with other things too. For the actual emblems, again, you have a lot of options here. So if you're trying to do dungeon speed farming, you're going to be using Trailblazing just to end up increasing your movement speed as much as possible. But then other good ones is Unyielding is going to be a good one. Chromatic is okay, but not great. You're not really going to be using it that much. You can use Sure Strike if you're not strong enough with your crit hit. And then otherwise the little beamer allies, where the evil eye is the one based on magic damage. That's going to end up being not bad. But generally speaking, you're going to end up using Arcane if you're trying to deal damage to everything. It really depends on how strong your character is, how reliant you are on the emblems, and how much of the game you are either doing in U10, delves, whatever, right? Like it entirely depends on that. So I'm just kind of giving you a point of reference of these are the best things that you could possibly end up using, kind of thing, right? Now, before we end up moving on to the gems, we'll talk about stats very briefly. So magic damage, obviously you want to have that as high as possible. But for mid to end game, I'd recommend that you want to have your base at least 80,000. Anything higher than that is obviously going to end up being all good. Your crit hit, you are trying to get to 100% or as close to 100% as possible, because with the way Trove works, crit hit is quite literally a percentage of success. So if you have 100% crit hit, you will end up having 100% crits. So it's just super optimal. But if your crit hit isn't high enough, of course, you can end up using Sure Strike to kind of compensate for that. And then for your crit damage, you want to have that anywhere from 800% and up. Again, just as kind of a low ball, starting out and slowly building on the character. Obviously, again, beggars can't really be choosers, but most of all, it's with the gems in mind. That's where it's really going to end up, depending on your luck and depending on how you end up having all these gems set up. But anyways, let's talk about the Cosmic Gem first and foremost. You'll be using Berserk Battler for damage, and then the Vampirium if you want to end up having speed, because it actually gives you a little bit of movement speed. But generally speaking, Berserk Battler is the one that you want to end up using on Tomb Raiser, because again, Tomb Raiser is about big chonko damage going into the delves and so on and so forth. The way you're going to have all of your Cosmic Gems set up, including the empowered one, is All Pearls Light, which sucks because you got to randomize it with the Contain Chaos Flare a lot, which costs a lot of Contain Chaos Sparks. And then the additional stats on the Cosmic Gems is going to end up being crit damage and magic damage, and then that's all there really is to it. Now, for the other empowered gems, Cubic Curtain is great for survivability. And Pyro Disc is kind of just a must in terms of movement speed. I'd say you can't really go wrong with those two. They're your most ideal. You don't have to have either of them. But again, Tomb Raiser, it's about surviving. So Cubic Curtain ends up coming in handy, especially if you're going into the deep delves. And then Pyro Disc is literally just for the extra boost of movement speed. Now, as far as your empowered gems are concerned, and then of course the class gem ability, but as far as your powered gems are concerned, you're going to end up having 2 pearls magic damage, 1 pearl crit damage, and then no pearls in crit hit. And that's going to end up being the same stats across the board for all of your cosmic gems, if at all possible. I don't even have this maxed out, but I guess I don't need to. That explains why my power rank is slightly dwindled. And then for the lesser gems, you don't have to follow this exactly, okay? This is just, again, a point of reference. But what I like to do is have a 3/3 ratio. So 3 of your lesser gems are going to end up being the exact same as your empowered. So 2 pearls magic, 1 pearl crit damage, no pearl crit hit. And then the other 3 are going to end up being 2 pearls crit damage, 1 pearl magic damage, and no pearls in crit hit. Now, if you end up having over 100% crit hit, you can swap any additional crit hit that you can off of your gems for max health, just to give you that more survivability. You know, it's always a nice thing. And again, if you end up having your gems slightly changed with the pearl augmentation, slightly different than me, it doesn't matter. At the end game, you know, you can slightly optimize your character a little bit more than this, but generally speaking, you're going to be doing so much heaps of damage at this point with your gems fully augmented that it really doesn't make much of a difference. You know, it's not a big deal. It's not as big a deal as most people make the end game coefficiency and stuff like that out to be. That's most of all if you're trying to like solo Leviathans and trying to be as optimal as possible, which to me is one of the least fun things in the game, which is Leviathans. And even Delves, it's like I don't really go that deep. I usually just go to like 130 and then I pull out and just refresh the portal, because it's like, why not? If you're even lucky enough to get that deep, to end up having the boss continually spawn at that point anyways. But yeah, anyways, I think that pretty much covers everything that you guys need to know about the Tomb RAISER. Hopefully I covered everything that you were looking for, but generally speaking, you know, the class is extremely user-friendly. Even at the beginning of the game, this character slaps. So I highly recommend the class. Tomb RAISER's always been one of my favorite classes, you know, in terms of its style and abilities and everything like that. And it just generally speaking is a walking tank. Like, it just decimates everything and is almost invincible. Not entirely, but almost. But anyways, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed and hope you found this video helpful. If you did, I would appreciate if you smash like, sub for more, buy the merch you want to support the channel, and have a wonderful day, ladies and gentlemen.